Very good and pleasant morning to everybody. Leslie, thank you very much for this elaborate introduction. It's kind of embarrassing because you have to perform according to what you were told about me. But forget about all those things. We will concentrate on this subject in this morning, well-being in Buddhist perspective. In fact, the reason for me to think about saying a few things about the concept of well-being is basically ultimately Dhamma has to serve our day-to-day life. Traditionally, the Buddhists think sometimes that Dhamma is for the next world, but actually Dhamma has to be for the present moment and the present life. So to explore what Dhamma can do to us, or how we can make use of Dhamma to elevate our own lives. So this is the basic theme that I will be sharing some ideas with you. Now, when I thought about talking about well-being, now we know that in our life, we are basically concerned about well-being. Now, well-being is we can say, prime target in our life. In other words, how do we feel about ourselves? How do we judge ourselves? How do we carry on our things? In what kind of mental setup we are carrying our work? So all these things have something to do ultimately with our sense of well-being, sense of about our own well-being. Now, in other words, to put it very simply, do we feel okay? Do we feel all right about our own life? We get up in the morning and attend to our day-to-day things, but are we satisfied? Are we happy? You know, these are some of the, they are in a way pretty simple things, but at the same time, we know that they are very, very important overall. Now, we can be big executives, or we can be very big business people, or we can be professors, or whatever. But all these things we do, and we spend time. But while we do all these things, whether we are really satisfied, really happy, whether we have the right frame of mind. So, it is this direction that I will be thinking when I talk about well-being. Now, when we look at the concept of well-being, this subject is highly discussed subject in studies on human being. What it is has been defined by many. Some define it as what is ultimately good for a person. Health, happiness, and prosperity are considered essential aspects of that. Now, there is no debate about that. Our health is of prime importance, and also happiness and prosperity, material prosperity. So these three things. And then some talk about multi-dimensional well-being, comprising the following features: competence, emotional stability, engagement, meaning, optimism, positive emotion, positive relationship, resilience, self-esteem, and vitality, so on. So, if you go into Google, you can find so much about these things. So, it is not my job to talk about those things, so go into those details. But this morning we will see what type of insights Buddhism can give when we think about our own well-being. How well-being is defined is culture-relative and context-dependent. Nevertheless, we may agree that it should encompass total well-being of an individual. Now, we cannot give some kind of universal definition of well-being. Now, how do I feel all right, okay, good? Depends on who I am. Whether I'm a child or whether I'm a youth or whether I'm a grown-up person. So it depends on. And also what I am doing for my living. So all these things are connected. So that's why I say it is culture relative in different cultures, in different countries, different situations. You know, there are things people would need to feel good about it. However, the total well-being of an individual, the total well-being, it will be clear what I mean by this in the course of discussion. In this discussion, I'm not going to summarize and review modern views of well-being, which are easily accessible. What I would do is to examine the Buddhist view, insights and practices relevant to the total well-being of a person. Now, this concept of total well-being, of course, you again come across in the literature on well-being, quite commonplace. But basically, the concept of total well-being is also, we can say, the Buddhist concept, because Buddhism looks at the well-being of the person as totality of the person. It is not only one aspect. It is not only your wealth. It is not only your education. It's not only your relationships, but the totality of the whole thing. So this is something. The Buddha's mission started, let's go a little bit into the history, asking his first 60 monastic followers to go to people for their welfare and happiness. Hita and Sukha, these are two Pali words. Now, when you look at the Buddha's own life, I'm sure you all know it. Now, when the Buddha attained enlightenment, when he achieved his purpose, then he thought about how to give this message to the world, because there was no point, him alone getting this feeling and experience. We are told that Buddha spent the time experiencing the happiness of liberation. There's a Pali term for that, vimutti sukha pati sangvedi. Don't worry about that too much. What it means is experiencing the happiness of liberation. Now, this happiness of liberation, Buddha was experiencing, and then it was the idea that it should be given to as many people as possible. So when Buddha taught the Dhamma, first to his 5 early friends, and then subsequently whole group became 60 monastic disciples who had attained arahanthood, which means that particularly in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, the difference between the Buddha and the Arahant is only the Buddha is the kind of pioneer who realized it first, and the others who followed the instructions of the Buddha and achieved it for themselves. So the tradition is very clear in holding that as far as Arahanthood is concerned, there is no difference between the Buddha and the Arahant. Okay? I mean, there are differences between the Buddha and the Arahant, but as far as the Arahanthood, their purity is concerned, both Buddha and the Arahant are the same. Ultimately, both the Buddha and the Arahant would experience the same nirvanic experience. So this is why Buddha wanted to his immediate disciples to go in all different directions. The idea was for the welfare of and happiness of many. Bahujana hitaya, bahujana sukhaya. So the Buddha wanted to reach as many people as possible. So this shows that well-being and happiness are at the center of the very existence of Buddhism as an organization. So subsequently, we know that the group of the Buddha, bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, upasakas and upasikas, monastic followers, male and female, and the household followers, male and female, and they are developed a whole group around the Buddha. However, the basic idea was that this group of people should purify themselves from defilements and ultimately experience happiness. So, this well-being is at the heart of the Buddhist teaching. Now, when you take the Four Noble Truths, in the Four Noble Truths, we know that the central conception of Four Noble Truth is suffering. Sometimes, people think that why Buddhism talks so much about suffering. Actually, the significance of having suffering as the central conception is to know that there is a problem. So, when we acknowledge that there is a problem, then only we look for solution. Now, if we deny the problem, the existence of a problem, then we will never find a solution. So this is why Buddhism begins with suffering. Suffering is the problem. However, the Buddha would not stop at that, saying that everything is suffering, the world is suffering. However, then Buddha, the whole philosophy of the Four Noble Truths is to show that how this suffering is, terminated. So therefore, there is a very important message in the Four Noble Truths. Actually, Four Noble Truths, this scheme is the central part of Buddhism. Ultimately, everything in Buddhism has to be connected to that. Now, ultimately, the perfection of the Four Noble Truths doctrine is the liberation, vimukti, liberation from suffering. So the liberation from freedom. So the freedom is from defilements. And now this freedom from defilements and defiling factors means ultimately, that we attain purity in our mind. Now the purity in our mind leads to purity in the action and also purity in words. So in our speech and in our action. So therefore, in the Four Noble Truths, the central idea is that ultimately, assuring, attaining human well-being. From a Buddhist perspective, well-being is the overall sense of satisfaction, contentedness, and feeling of happiness as a human being living in the world among other human beings. As a part of the larger reality of natural world comprising animals, birds, and the environment, trees, plants, rivers, oceans, mountains, etc. This tries to locate our position. Now, we would like to think about ourselves as kind of independent, self-sufficient beings. But the actual fact is that we are a part of a larger reality. Within that larger reality, there are other human beings, other people, our friends, our colleagues, and so on. And then there are other beings, animals, birds, all that. And then not only that, we are also located in the environment, the trees, plants, rivers, oceans, and everything. So now, if you visualize yourself in that context, we can see that individually we are a very small part of that actually. Although thinking about ourselves, it is our nature that we think about ourselves as the kind of center of our own universe. I mean, it is so natural. However, if we think, the Buddhist point of view shows that, no, you are not the center of the universe. You ultimately have to see yourself in a larger context where, your place is there, but then your place has to be understood by you. Perhaps the familiar example to you would be if you look at some ancient Chinese landscape paintings. Now, in these ancient Chinese landscape paintings, you can see that huge mountains, waterfalls, huge trees, and all these things. And if you look at very carefully, you can see a kind of small cottage. And then if you look at even more carefully, you can see like a finger type of small human being. But the picture is huge. Actually, that really indicates where we are. We are there. But of course, what is the position we occupy in this whole universe? So in a way, it is minute. Okay. But at the same time, we know that human beings have such a powerful mind and, the trained mind, so that huge world we can get together and change it. It's true, but at the same time, if we take individual human being, there are so many reasons for us to be humble. So therefore, the whole idea is that you need to see yourself within the context of this larger reality. So this is one thing, because we really locate where we are. We really, now, this kinds of melts down gradually into our family life, from society, larger society, your workplace, and ultimately your family life. How do you project yourself? How do you project within your family? How do you relate to other people? So all these things depend on how you define yourself. So this defining well-being by defining who we are, what is our the position. Now, how one earns one's livelihood, how one relates to others, including those in one's family, workplace, society, are important aspects of one's sense of well-being. Now, in Buddhism, well-being is both internal and external, inner and outer. Or it is one's material well-being as well as that of inner. Psychological well-being and physical and material well-being, and both have to be taken together. Now, internal, external means actually, usually we look at the external well-being. Signs of external well-being are you are well-dressed and you have a very nice house and you have a good vehicle to go about. These are, you have a good bank balance. So these are the marks of our external well-being. However, Buddhism makes it very clear that well-being has to be understood both in internal and external sense. Okay, first we will look at material aspect. Some tend to think that Buddhism despises material comfort. It is wrong. The Buddha rejected self-mortification, inflicting pain to oneself. Now, we know that at the very beginning, Buddha said that, one should avoid this extreme. Now, I think this has to be understood again rightly. Suffering and poverty are not praised in Buddhism. Poverty, according to Buddha, is sorrowful and evil. It is not a virtue believed to provide easier access to heaven. Now, very often when we talk about religion, people think that poverty is a virtue. Of course, if I refer to other religions, don't take it as a criticism, but simply to understand. Now, in the Christian tradition, of course, poverty, this word itself, it is used as a virtue, poverty as a virtue, and then being rich as, something detrimental to higher attainment. So in Buddhist context, I think it is very important that poverty and simplicity have to be distinguished. You are simple does not mean that you are poor. Actually, if you look at the concept of poverty, you can see that ultimately the concept of poverty is a psychological concept, not a material concept. Because if you feel poor, then of course it is something to do with your mind. Sometimes, people who do not have a place to live and nothing to eat, naturally they can be feeling that they are deprived of certain things. But still, important thing is the poverty is a sense in your mind. Now you can be a millionaire. However, if you compare with other multimillionaire, you will feel poor. Then what happens is, even with millions, you feel that you are poor, you are poverty. So ultimately, poverty is psychological. So it doesn't necessarily depend on your bank balance or your other material things, because, if you compare yourself with, the others, then you're always bound to feel that you are they're not sufficient. So, this is something very, very important. We need to understand the difference between poverty and also simplicity. Even the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis had to have the 4 requisites: cloth, food, lodgings, and medicine for their sustenance. They had to have clean bodies and clean physical environment in order to engage in meditation. The householders had to have these things sufficiently, and also they had to have something extra to maintain the religious people who depended on them for their existence. Now, if you take the existence of a life of a person who is dedicated for meditation, say a Buddhist monk, Buddha makes it very clear that the meditating Buddhist monk has to have the 4 basic requisites: robes, food, lodging, and the medicine and other requirements. So without those things, you can't. And then also he has to have a clean body, and then in order to develop a clean mind. Now again, I am saying this very often. We think that if you are really a serious person, then you don't have time to attend to your body. So sometimes, the seriousness of the people is gauged to the extent that you neglect your bodily appearance, and, you are disheveled in your hair and you don't care about your clothes. And then people tend to think that, that is a mark of some kind of inner development. The more you don't care about your body. Actually, now this is not the Buddhist view. Of course, somebody can be spending whole time on maintaining body. That is not what is meant. But even for a meditating Buddhist monk, Buddha makes it very clear that you have to have a clean body. That means you are taking a bath, wash your face, and, the brush your teeth, and clean body. Now you remember in the Buddha's own life story, when he spent all 6 years depriving his body of all these things, then finally he decided that with that practice he has not gone anywhere. So he stopped that. He gave up that. And then he started taking a bath in the nearby river and also have a decent meal. Then his friends, 5 people, they thought that no, hopeless, now this person got into, worldly way of life, and they left him. But for the Buddha, it was a new beginning, because he realized that, starving and mortifying the body would not take him as far as the inner development is concerned, it would not take him anywhere. So he gave up. But then when he gave up, the popular conception was that you have to really torture your body. Now, even now, if you go to a place like Benares in India, you can see that, all these so-called holy people, smeared with all kinds of dust and, so is something like more you dirty, more you advance in your spiritual attainments, something like that. So the clean body, clean clothes, and spiritual development do not seem to be going together, but that is the wrong idea. In the Buddhist tradition, of course, a Buddhist monk is not fabulously wearing rich, the expensive things, but he is wearing a clean piece of cloth. Now that is the most important thing. And his body is also clean. So the cleanliness of the body. And also he has a decent meal. Now this is why basically simplicity and poverty. So poverty is basically a concept of attitude in our mind. In our mind. But simplicity is a kind of way of behavior. Now, basically, in the teaching, in the Dhamma, Buddhist monk is described as like a bird when flying, no extra burden, only the wings. So he would fly. That is the idea. I know actually I know this incident personally. This happened in a long time ago when in fact, I studied in Hawaii, in the United States, so I know that this happened in relation to Hawaii. So one Sri Lankan monk who came to Hawaii, this happened to him. He went to airport to get get into the plane, and then when he went to entrance and the customs, the officer had asked him, "Oh, Reverend, where is your luggage?" Then, he had this alms bowl on his shoulder hanging. He had taken it and kept it on the table. So, this is my luggage. And then this officer kind of got annoyed. And he had said, "No, I asked, where is your luggage?" And then the monk had said, "Well, sir, this is my luggage." And then when he opened it, he found one extra robe, his toothbrush, and, few personal items inside the alms bowl. So then this officer had to reconcile with the idea that, what is the type of luggage. Of course, we all have, a lot of luggage when we travel. But this particular incident, now what is the difference here? Actually, he did have his very basic personal requirements within that alms bowl, the extra robe and the toothbrush and, a few things. All that he needed, but nothing more. Now, how to describe this person? Now, is he like... we have heard about Imelda Marcos, who had about plane load of luggage when she was traveling. And if you compare, this monk with that type of person, is this particular monk poor monk? Is this because of poverty? No, it is not poverty actually. Poverty is a negative thing. But the simplicity, if you do not have too many needs in your life and not too many wants in your life, you are all right with few whatever things. So this is the whole conception. The Buddhism advocated that all the time. Buddha would visit places and then people would give him meal and then he would take the meal and, consume it. But nothing taken, nothing taken, the back with him, just goes empty-handed, free. So the whole concept was that if you want, you can live. But of course, I am not recommending that for the ordinary householders. But what I am why I tell this story is that simply to see that there's a different dimension to it, depending on your needs, So therefore, having less needs is not being poor or is not poverty. So this is, so therefore, the clean body and the pleasant face, these things are not anti-religious. Now again, we have another Jataka story where this young prince did not want to succeed as the ruler. He finally left into the forest. Father king did not like it, but anyway, he had to give permission. And then the young prince left to the forest and started living in the forest, simple life. And then after some time, the story says that father visited his son. He expected this young man to be gloomy looking, depressed, because he did not have any of the comforts he had in the palace. But then to his amazement, he saw that young prince was very pleasant, calm, quiet, and then pleasant looking. So he could not understand. Then he asked, how? Why? I mean, without any of these things, any of the comforts, how are you keeping yourself so calm and pleasant? Then the young prince explained to the king that, well, great king, I don't have hopes, too many things about the future. I don't regret the past. I live in, and so on. So I don't want to go into detail of that. But basically, you can see that not having things does not mean that you need to become gloomy, because it is your choice. But of course, if we try to get things and if we still don't have things, then we become miserable, because we're trying to get that and we can't get that. So that's a different thing. But on the other hand, if you really do not need so many things, and then you are satisfied with that. And then particularly this way of life, the Buddhist way of life, has been that that was actually the general Indian way of life. Now, for the religious people in ancient India, there were so many types of religious people, not only Buddhist, Jaina, and many others. But for their meal, they depended on the people. They depended on the ordinary people. However, it is very beautiful. The mendicant or the religious person comes before your gate and standing there. You are not expected to fill his alms bowl. You are expected to, if you have something, just to give something little. And that's all. So it is not an extra burden on you. In fact, as you know, even today, up to today, if you take particularly country like Myanmar or Thailand, particularly in Myanmar, where people are very, very simple, and then you wonder, because early morning, like 6 o'clock, practically hundreds of Buddhist monks hit the road with their alms bowl. And then how do these not so rich-looking people, how do they maintain? But it is not a burden on them. It is not a burden on them, because whatever they have, small thing they will give. But as far as the monk is concerned, when he gets whatever he needs from 10, 12 places, then he is okay. And then he would just go back to the monastery. So therefore, the whole practice has not been a burden on the people. It's like there is a very well-known Pali statement in the Sutta Nipata. It says, Pacchati munino bhattang, thoka thokang kule kule. In every house, little by little, munis, sages, food is being cooked, being prepared. So every house prepares. That doesn't mean that every house has to fully maintain him. No. Every house cooks something and gives a little bit of that to that. So, that was the type of the existence of the monk. However, in the Buddhist tradition, for the lay people, householders, Buddha says that they have not only to be self-sufficient, they have to have something little more. They have to have something little more. That something little more is for them to do other things, including maintaining the religious people. So therefore, as far as the ordinary householders is concerned, in Buddhism, there is no any bar or upper limit or something. Okay, beyond this you can't earn. Now, Buddha never makes that kind of demarcation, limit. Only thing Buddha says is being wealthy is not a sin, provided that one has earned one's wealth righteously. Dhammikena, Dhammaladhena. So as far as you earn your wealth in the right manner, there is no upper limit for that. You can earn as much as you can, but it should not violate the righteousness. It should not violate the sense of right, in society, particularly in earning your economy, wealth. So we can see that material wealth is a needed thing as a part of our sense of well-being. Okay, now let me go into another very important aspect of our well-being, interdependent nature of well-being, both oneself and other. Now, when we talk about well-being, we tend to think about it as something I have to achieve by myself. So my own well-being. However, Buddhism holds somewhat different view. Buddhism says welfare and happiness are not only for oneself, well-being is always for oneself and the other, both. In Pali words, it says attahita and parahita. So the both oneself and other. This insight is derived from the Buddhist teaching of dependent origination, paticcasamuppada. One cannot neglect oneself at the expense of the other and vice versa. This suggests that there are limits to altruism. The self-sacrifice is not always or generally recommended. Now, we all know about the doctrine of dependent origination, paticcasamuppada. Now, this very important doctrine we understand as how Buddha explained how suffering arises and then how to get rid of suffering. Now, but that understanding is not incorrect, but that is not the completely correct understanding. Paticcasamuppada or dependent origination is the Buddhist explanation of reality. Buddhist explanation of how anything will happen in the universe, not only arising of suffering and cessation. How the point is, the Buddha's main idea was to teach people how suffering arises and ceases. So therefore, in the Buddhist literature, in the discourses, when you see paticcasamuppada, dependent origination, you always see it as how suffering arises. In the Pali formula, you may know it, avidya paccaya sankhara, so from ignorance, constructions arise and so on. So it is how suffering arises and also how suffering ceases. Now these two things. But paticcasamuppada does not mean only that. Actually, that is one very important process in our human life. However, the entire human life, according to Buddhism, is described according to paticcasamuppada. That's the important thing. So in other words, it shows that how things take place dependently. Okay? Now, this is how everything happens in the universe. For example, you may have heard about niyama dharma, kamma niyama, utu niyama, chitta niyama, niyama. Niyama means natural principle. The meaning of the word is natural principle. Now, kamma is, according to Buddhism, natural principle, happening according to causes and conditions. For example, if we do something good, conditioned on that, we get good. If we do something bad, we get bad. Now, behind that process is paticcasamuppada, dependent origination. So if you want to understand how kamma is activated, the principle behind is paticcasamuppada. Because there is no any person or any agent or anybody to record everything you did, good things and bad things, and give results accordingly. No, it is not a individual thing. There is no God or there is no anybody who is doing that for you. How does it happen then? The Buddha would say that it happens according to the causes and conditions. The moment we do something wrong, we provide causes and conditions for something bad to happen. So, sooner or later, it will take place. Same thing when we do something good, we provide causes and conditions for something good to happen. I mean, there is nothing extraordinary about it. Say, for example, I treat you very well and I speak to you very good and pleasant language, and you become happy. And then, I provided some condition for you to treat me in the same way subsequently. I mean, that is how it is. So simply because my act in the same manner, if I behave rudely to you, then of course, again, I planted, I created conditions for someone to treat me rudely. So, like that. And then not only that, Buddha says chitta, how our mind activates, and then utuniyama, how the natural world, the seasons come, bijaniyama. For example, you plant a mango seed, and then you get a mango plant. Who is doing that? Nobody is doing that. Okay, nobody is doing that simply because you planted the mango seed, so therefore you get a mango plant. You planted the jack seed, and then you will get a jack plant. So the conditions and the causes you provided produce the required corresponding plant. So like that, Buddha explained not only how suffering arises and ceases, everything according to this idea. Now, one implication of this doctrine of dependent origination is that these causes and conditions ultimately how they affect or how they influence our own existence. For example, in this particular context, we can say that my happiness, my sense of well-being actually depend on others. And then others' happiness and well-being also depend on me. In other words, I cannot be isolated from the process. I can't forget about everybody else and just be happy. Now, if you look at ordinarily our existence, we are wearing clothes, we are using so many things, and in this, just think about this particular setup today here. How many people have joined together to create this world for us? I did not create this, I don't know. I mean, who created this? Somebody made this, somebody brought this, somebody bought it and donated or bought it here. And then, and everything. I am wearing clothes, but I did not make my clothes. I had breakfast in the morning. Some good people prepared the breakfast in the morning. And then, I mean, if you look at our whole life, we can see that within this particular setup, thousands of people are behind us. We are not alone. We can't live alone, really. Now, this is the fundamental insight of dependent origination. So, some people have done their job. So, we are living here. So, in the same manner, we do our job. And then, the entire world will be. So, therefore, although it is not quite clear and obvious, but I have to do my part. You have to do your part. Everybody has to do their own parts. Then get together. We are building a world. So now, Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination, dependent arising is actually this dependent existence. Now, when we apply that to the concept of well-being, I can't be just thinking about my only of my own well-being. I have to think about the well-being of the others. Now, for example, if you take a small setup, if we are in our household family life, only one person cannot eat and be happy while others are not eating. And I mean, simply, we know that you can't be happy. Of course, sometimes, similar situations could arise, but we can't describe that person to be happy. We are not happy. But we all are happy if we have whatever the thing we share among everybody, and, if we live in that manner. So the happiness, my happiness depends on others, and others' happiness depends on me. So this interrelatedness is, something very, very important. The philosophical question behind this self and other. How much room you should allocate for yourself? How much room you should allocate for others? Okay, that's the deeper, I would say, philosophical question. Now, in our life, some people could decide, no, I forget myself, I exist only for the sake of others. I mean, that is fine because that is your choice, okay? But do you have to do that? Buddhism would say no. Buddhism would say no. That's why I say altruism has limits. Now, Buddhism considers always that we need to take care of ourselves and also we need to take care of others, okay? So it is not complete self-sacrifice. But complete self-sacrifice can happen if you make that choice, okay? I mean, there are cases where people make that choice. We have the Bodhisattva stories, Jataka stories, where Buddha made, that choice. And also in the modern times, all the time in the world, we have that type of stories. And I know that there were, for some medical experiments, for example, to try medicine or vaccination for something like AIDS, there were some volunteers. Now, what does it mean? A person goes as a volunteer for that type of test means he accepts death. Maybe it will ending in death or not. That's a different thing. But self-sacrifice, but then that's a choice. That's an intelligent choice. You can do that. Buddhism doesn't say anything about it. But having said that, on the other hand, we know that Buddhism says that both self and other have to be taken in an equal manner. For example, if you think about your own internal welfare, inner welfare, you can't really sacrifice that and try to help others. But there are limits. I will give you another example. For example, in the Buddhist monastic life, it says very clearly that suppose the teacher of a monastic person is sick, okay? Now, the pupil can't say, no, I can't take care of you, I have to go and meditate. No, you can't say that. If your teacher is ill, suffering from a serious disease, the Vinaya says very clearly that you have to take care of that person till that person lives or till you live. So it is like that. You can't simply say that I have to go and meditate. I have to attain nirvana, so I can't really look after the sick person. No. Actually, your path can be looking after the sick person itself could be your path. So you can't really go away from that. Same thing with your parents according to Buddhism. If they require your help and support, I mean, there is no reason for you to not to do that. You have to do that. So you can't say that I have higher things to do, go and attend meditation or something like that. Although meditation is very important, but still you have to be. So, there are this type of considerations. But nevertheless, the how we treat ourselves and others, because when we are doing things, we need to make this balance all the time. Now, in discourses, there is a very interesting story. The story of two acrobats. This story says that, acrobats are kind of doing a dangerous thing, right? Risky thing. So in this story, there is the senior person, teacher, and the apprentice. So one day when they were to perform, teacher says to the apprentice, okay, this is a dangerous game. People are watching us. We have to entertain them, and that is how we make living. So he says to apprentice, so you protect me, and I protect you. So this way we will perform, and then we will make money and live happily. Then apprentice says, no, sir. You protect yourself. I protect myself. And that is the way to do this dangerous game. Now, it's interesting. So teacher says, you protect me and I protect you. But the apprentice says, no, you protect yourself and I protect myself. That way we both protect ourselves. So what is the right attitude? Actually, the discourse doesn't exactly say what is the right thing, but it looks like that the Buddha seems to be approving what the apprentice said. When you look after yourself, when the other person look after himself, then of course both are self-sufficient. The moment you hand over your protection to the other and take the responsibility of the protecting the other, neither are responsible, right, for oneself. So it looks like Buddha is saying that, no, you have to be responsible for yourself. Other person has to be responsible for other person. So then in that manner, when everyone is responsible for themselves, then of course that society will be the safe society. So, of course, this can be changed. If you are a parent and your children are small children, that's a different. So, it doesn't mean that, it has to be like that all the time. Basically, your dependents are there, your children are there. So, you have to take care of them. You have to make decisions on behalf of them. That's true. But when you are dealing with adults, Buddhism says that don't try to make decisions on behalf of them. Buddha never did that. What the Buddha would do is, Buddha would teach, guide people to make the right decision. But Buddha would not make the decision on behalf of them. There's a big difference. I mean, even being parents, being elders, you can do the same thing when your children and others are grown up. You can guide them. You can teach them how to make the right decision. But if you make the decision on behalf of them, then what happens is, next decision also you have to make. Next decision also you have to make. Then you have created a whole group of dependent people. Isn't it a burden to you? It's a burden. I mean, what you would rather do it. So therefore, the story of these two acrobats is really very interesting. Ultimately, how you balance yourself and the other. And one's own happiness and that of other are interdependent. One cannot exist without the other. What is underlined is the balance of one's behavior. So again, in this kind of thing, we don't have a simple answer like 2 + 2 makes 4 or something. No, we don't get that type of answer. But we need to, think about seriously, deeply, how to, manage our own behavior in this kind of situation. Now, let me talk to you a little bit on unique features in the Buddhist concept. One thing is being conscious of limits. Happiness and satisfaction do not always come with abundance of things, stuff. Happiness comes with contentment. In Buddhist analysis, human desire is endless. None can satisfy one's desire by getting everything that is desired. In the Dhammapada, it says, even with the outpour of gold coins, one is not satisfied. The world is deficient, unsatisfied, and slave to thirst. This comes in the Rattapala Sutta. Now, what this says is being conscious of our limits means, now we know that our well-being requires us to be educated, rich, and accomplished, all these things are there. However, Buddhism says to us that we need to be realistic about our goals. We need to have goals, but then our goals have to be, we have to set them realistic. Because very often what we think that we can get everything we want and then be happy. But Buddhism would say, no, that is not possible. Actually, there is, this proverbial story of a king. I think I mentioned this also in my last speech, where the king wanted to carpet the entire kingdom wherever he walks. But then the minister advising him, no, don't do that, it's impossible, but carpet your feet. Then wherever you put your feet will be carpeted. You feel that way. So this kind of thing indicates that we need to be conscious about our own ambitions and the expectations and the desires. So it is, don't misunderstand, it doesn't mean that not to have ambitions or not to have desires or expectations, but to have realistic and being knowing your limits. Because the whole point is this. Now, Buddhism says that now in the Rattapala Sutta we have world is deficient. That means we always feel that something is missing, something is lacking, I need something more. Unsatisfied, and then slave to thirst. Actually, this particular statement comes in the Majjhima Nikaya. There's this very beautiful sutta called Rattapala Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. I recommend you to read it. It's a beautiful story. Rattapala is young and also very, very rich person in his wherever he lived. But then at some point, he listens to the Buddha and he gives up everything and becomes a follower of the monastic follower of the Buddha. And then, becomes a monastic follower, practices and becomes an arahant. He comes back to visit his parents. Now, having come back to visit his parents, he happened to stay the night in the king's garden. And then that day, it so happened that king also visited the park. King was a fairly advanced in age, elderly person. And then when he saw that this young man had become a monk, he could not believe his eyes. Then he approached him and asked, because King knew about this person because he was the biggest businessman in his kingdom. So King asked, how? Why? What happened? Why did you become a monk? Why did you give up everything? And then Rattapala answered, seeing certain natures of human life, I decided to become a monk. Now, one of the natures he mentioned is, this world is always lacking in something. They are not satisfied. Now, what this means is this. If we are driven by our craving all the time, we crave for something. For example, if I want to get this, suppose this is a very, very valuable pen or something, so I want to get this. So I collect money and I finally purchase it. But it so happens that the moment you have it in your hand, half the value is gone. Because up to that point, you were trying to get this. But once you got it, of course, that whole fascination about the object is gone. But does that mean that your desire is gone? No. My desire is there, but now I am trying to achieve something else. So my desire goes on and on. Now, it's very interesting if you look at Buddhism and also modern marketing. Actually, both. Modern marketing also knows this character of our mind. That's why modern marketing knows that you produce anything. If you are a good salesman, you can sell it. Because we buy things because it is the latest model, because it is cute, or because it is on sale, and all types of things. There are reasons for us to buy. And then that's why, every 6 months you get the new brand of your telephone. But doesn't mean that everything is new or anything. Just the appearance is new. Because the marketing knows that your desire is endless. However, Buddha said this long time ago. But the difference is this. Whereas marketing is trying to sell whatever they produce to you and make use of your desire, Buddha would say that, no, make a limit to it. Limit it. Be rational. Be mindful. And then finally, of course, when you become an arahant, you give up your craving completely. But you and I, we cannot do that. But what we can do is what Buddha says is that know your limits. Know your limits. Don't really, the completely, destroy your life, trying to achieve the goals. But set up realistic goals and try to achieve them so that, so therefore this particular nature of life, hence it is rational to be content and conscious of one's limits. A couple of years ago, I read this book published in the United States, I think. The title of the book is Stuff. If you Google it, you will be able to find it. Fairly, about 300-page, fairly big book actually. The title of the book is Stuff. The whole point of that book is to how much stuff, things we have around us that we really do not need. So, it's a book with a very good message. I thought it's interesting. How to take it when one's well-being is threatened. Another very important thing is, okay, we are striving to achieve well-being. Now, if something happens and our well-being is threatened, then how are we to cope with that? In modern concepts of well-being, this aspect is not addressed. How should one face loss of wealth, relatives, fame, etc., illness and death? The Buddha's advice to Nakula Pita and Nakula Mata, elderly couple who complain to the Buddha of their being very old and feeble. Buddha says, it is lunacy to wish for perfect physical health. Make sure that your mind is not sick. So now this elderly couple, they were very, friendly to the Buddha. They visited one time and, both started complaining that they are very old and they can't walk properly and so on. Then Buddha said to them, look, if you think about the perfect physical health, Buddha says that it is a lunacy, it is being crazy to think about perfect physical health. So forget about that, Buddha says. Of course, don't neglect your health. We should not neglect our health. But what it means is, even taking very good care of our own bodies, we all have some problem or other. So Buddha says that that's perfectly normal. However, Buddha says to this elderly couple, make sure that your mind is not sick. Your body can be sick, but don't make sure that your mind is not sick. So the Pali word uses anatura chitto. Anatura, not atura, not sick. So how to accept, how to cope with the 8 natures of the world, we know gain and loss, fame and ill fame, blame and praise, happiness and pain. So we must be able to deal with these things with equanimous mind. So this is another part of our concept of idea of well-being. And then two inner qualities conducive to well-being. We are running out of time. Let me cultivating positive qualities in one's mind. Cultivating a mind of loving kindness to all beings as the most conducive for one's well-being as well as well-being of others. Now, the Karnimetta Sutta is quite familiar to you. But so that is a very good thing. But at the same time, something not very good is, because Karnimetta Sutta is so familiar to us, I don't think many of us really think about the value of that ideas contained in that sutta. Because I think Karnimetta Sutta is some kind of universal declaration of metta or friendliness. Actually, nowhere I have seen a statement of this nature. So if you analyze Karnimetta Sutta, you can see that it's a very valuable thing. But we chant it. I think the most important thing is, chanting is good, but at the same time, think about the meaning. Metta, friendliness. This concept of friendliness goes beyond everything. For example, you can be husband and wife. But being husband and wife is a kind of legal thing. However, if you are friendly with your husband and wife, then the relationship is different. Same thing with brothers and sisters. Being a brother, being a sister within the family is a kind of legal thing. However, if the brothers and sisters are friends, I think that relationship becomes very beautiful. So, not the legal things actually. You have to have a friendship. You really have a friendship. Sisters are like friends. Very beautiful. Brothers are like friends. It's a very beautiful thing. Brothers and sisters are like friends. Otherwise, what happens is, okay, you are the elder brother, you are the younger brother, you are the elder sister, so, all kinds of, you have to obey me, and, and then finally they fight over the property of the parents. But that will not happen if you are friendly, because friendliness is such a great thing. So the being a friend of everybody. Now, moment the Karaniya Metta Sutta says, Sabbe Satta Bhavantu Sukhitatta. May all beings. Now, beings means not only human beings, it encompasses all the beings. So the moment you are able to say that, that is something great. One last point about metta is, very often in practicing metta, we use some kind of formula. We say, may all beings be well and happy, and so on. However, if you look at this formula, when you say all beings, funnily, all beings do not have a name. All beings do not have a face. So in a way, in a very superficial level, very easily you can say, may all beings be happy. But can you really say, think about your next person, this person be well and happy? Can you think? Can you think about people in that manner? Think about the people who have a name and who have a face. Can you think, this particular person, let this particular person, let X, let Y be happy? I think that is the difficulty. You can very easily say, may all beings be happy, because all beings are all beings. So, either you say that at a very great level, where you really mean that all beings, or it simply becomes a sentence. It simply becomes an utterance. You are not practicing metta. You are simply uttering something. But for me, I think the most important thing is I must be able to think about you with the face and with the name, and then think about, no, everything should be okay with him, nothing should bad happen to him, and in that manner. Of course, practicing metta has 1,000 ways to do that. 1,000 ways to do that. So metta has to be in that sense. Okay, the second aspect is having right attitude, sammaditi. Two inner qualities, having right attitude is also very important. As I said at the beginning, ultimately you will ask, okay, how to achieve well-being, particularly inner well-being. There is no one recipe or simple recipe for that. But these two qualities, whether you are friendly to the world, to the environment, to the trees and plants, to the cats and dogs, birds. So, that is, ultimately is your own mental disposition. Okay, the second thing is right attitudes. Within the given situation, of course, again, there is no easy recipe for that, but having the right perspective and the right attitudes. Okay, let me wind up, and of course, we will have a little bit time for if you all need any ask questions. In the Buddha's words, all beings like to live and do not like to die. All beings desire happiness and despise pain. Now, this is the nature of all beings. We want to live, we don't want to die. We like happiness, we don't like suffering. This shows that achieving well-being is what human life is all about. So if this nature is the correct thing about our life, then all of us want to have well-being. Buddhism teaches us not only to strive to achieve well-being, but also to be mindful, rational, and courageous enough to cope with any threat to one's state of well-being. While striving for one's own well-being, a human being with right attitude should strive for the well-being of others, including all other beings and environments. So Buddhism in that manner talks about a very comprehensive concept of well-being, where you feel content and happy about yourself, inner and also outer. And at the same time, you relate to other world, other people in the right manner, so that you also contribute to the well-being of the other people, because ultimately my well-being depends on you and your well-being depends on me. Thank you very much. So we will have if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Professor.
Yes.
It's very well said on the perspective of the well-being, but how about during the Buddha's time? Even now, there are the people they call like the Buddhists, but they practically they are practicing more like just now Professor said, like they not according to what the Buddhas taught them, but they practice something more like the Hindu or some other thing, like, they look for something different and then not even want to think of their own, that kind of like responsibility, whether as a lay person or as a monk or as any individual. Then they have like the children, they left the children and then abandon or escape from the family, and then after that they say they are practicing. And are they considered Buddhist or non-Buddhist in the real perspective of the Buddha's thought?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If I got your question comment correctly, actually when we look at both the two groups, monastic and the lay people, we have bhikkhu and bhikkhuni, and then also upasaka and upasika. Now within these two groups, the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, monastic, lay, female and male members, and their way of life is one type. And then when we look at the householders, of course, male and female again, householders' life is again a little bit, the different type. Now, the Buddha would look at these both groups. One particular thing Buddha would say is both monastic and lay people, they follow the same path taught by the Buddha. In other words, although it looks like there are two paths for the two groups of people, in Buddhism there is only one path, namely Sila, Samadhi and Prajna. However, the difference according to the Buddha is, although both lay people or householders and monastic people follow the same path, the difference is between the speed of the practice. In one of the Buddhist texts, Sutta Nipata, describes this with a very beautiful simile. It says that two birds, peacock. Now, peacock is very beautiful, picturesque, colorful, but peacock cannot fly, or if at all, his flying is very limited and slow. But if you take a swan is pure, simple, white, not colorful, simple, but very fast. So both are birds, both would fly, but whereas peacock, very colorful, is not flying very much, the simple looking swan flies much faster. Now, the monastic members are like comparable to swans who fly fast. And the lay people, householders, are like peacocks who are very picturesque. We are dressed in different manner, but so the path is the same. Now you can see again, you see this, I think many things I said have to be understood within these two contexts. Now when I talk about, for example, simplicity of a Buddhist monk, it basically applicable to the Buddhist monk. However, it does not mean that simplicity is not for people like us. Simplicity is also people like us, but it will not be the same extent of the simplicity of a Buddhist monk. For example, a Buddhist monk can, travel around in the world with his arms full and one extra robe. But you and I can't do that. If I were to talk here, I have to wear something. If I have to go to something else. So like that, the life is more complicated. But Buddhism does not have a problem with that. So it depends on simplicity, and these virtues depends on the context, whether you are a lay person or household person or a monastic person. Now, for a household person, actually the life is much more complex. As I also try to say, like, we can be a mother, father, student, brother, sister, or whatever. Depending on these roles, we have to do certain things, and so on. We have to make money. So Buddha would allow those things, but what the Buddha would say is, don't violate the Dhamma. Don't do anything wrong. So long as you do it in the righteous, good manner, you can go on earning your money, you can go on doing your other things. So therefore, ultimately, we can imagine an ideal situation, a Buddhist monk or even a lay person can be trying to achieve nirvana directly without looking at anything else. I mean, that's possible. However, what about for the ordinary people like us? What about for the ordinary monks who are engaged in various types of social activities? Now, they are not trying to attain nirvana directly, but they are treading a path which will ultimately lead to that goal, but of course it will be somewhat roundabout path, okay? It will take some time. But nevertheless, the important thing is both groups are treading the same path in different degrees. I don't know whether I'm responding to you, but I think these are some of the things that come into my mind when I think in that line.
Doctor, I think you kind of addressed my my questions in the last slide in your conclusion. But just to bring us back to the earlier, your presentation on the poverty issues, you say that there is no limit for lay persons who are already doing enough dana. They can no limit for them to generate their own wealth. Okay, that could be true during Buddha's time when agricultural society, when population, everyone is facing many people die, hunger. We have to generate more food, more wealth. Cultivate more land. But we are coming, as you say, we have to come into the larger reality. We are in the world whereby we have resolved most these kind of problems, But we are facing, especially after the Industrial Revolution, especially, okay. So we are facing a problem which is like, environmental degradations, greenhouse emissions and all those problems. So is that still work in that concept that we can continue to generate wealth? For example, poorer countries, they will continue want to aim for that living standard of so-called well-being, But then the rich countries say, no, you should have to stop it, because if we too much, we will hurt the earth, hurt our environment. You continue if everyone not doing the same thing. So I don't know which argument is correct and whether that's still relevant to today's larger reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. In fact, your question was when I said that there is no limit according to Buddhism that at where beyond which you can't earn or something. So thank you very much for your observation. Actually, now when we look at the world today, particularly when we consider the environment, the environmental pollution, and how the productions, the adversely affect environment. So within those situations, can we really go on producing as we really want to? That was, I think, kind of your question. Actually, I would include when Buddha says that don't violate the Dhamma. So that means don't violate what is right. I think it should include all these considerations. Now, although Buddhism would allow that, okay, you can earn as much money as you can, but can you do that without harming the other living beings, harming the nature, environment? These things become then very important. So if you really have to do that on your way, then I think that is the limit. So the Buddhism would really look at now, for example, in the Karanimetha Sutta, when we have, may all beings be happy. Now, on the one hand, for us to think that all beings be happy, and on the other hand, act as if we don't know anything about that Karanimetha Sutta dictum, then we are contradicting ourselves. So therefore, your observation is very valid. There are natural limits where we can earn. Okay, there are natural limits where we can earn. And then particularly when it comes to technology, long time ago, when I say long time ago, about 50 years ago, one scholar in England, Schumacher, he wrote a very interesting book called Small is Beautiful. The title of the book is Small is Beautiful. Now, the small is beautiful, he addresses this question. And then he tries to say that ultimately technology has to be human-friendly technology, which would not replace the role of the human being. You know, this is a very important thing, because if you take the role of the human being and the machinery is there in the place of human being, I think we are in trouble. So the idea was this concept of appropriate technology is that. Now, when we look at the modern developments, you know, it's a very interesting thing. For example, if you take just one example, you take AI, artificial intelligence, right? Now, because of the artificial intelligence, you know, life has been made very easy, but at the same time, the whole traditional concept of scholarship has gone into pieces. You know, I can just have this program and I can just verbally tell it I want to know about this. Lo and behold, you know, whole hundreds of pages come in and come in and come in. And then very often today, it's a very big challenge for universities and higher education centers. People write papers, monographs like anything, you know, because, you know, the material is so. But then the problem is this. Of course, you have a temporary gain out of that. But do we really have the knowledge? Now, the computer will give you all the information and you do your paper. But have you thought about it? What is this connection with your mental involvement? And then further, now with knowledge, we get some kind of shaping in our character. Knowledge is not only information, but here what has happened is knowledge has become simple information, and we have gathered so much information, but as ordinary human beings, knowledge is completely away from us. That is a problem. Not that, you know, the AI program will give you, I mean, there are situations whether it can be okay or not. But the problem is, with knowledge, you develop your thinking. With knowledge and thinking, you develop your attitudes. With good attitudes, you develop your behavior. Now, where are we going to get all those things with AI? You see, the problem is, so long as we are aware of the limits and limits of using these things, I think that should be okay. But ultimately, knowledge gives us a broader mindedness and the attitude change and all these things. If we cannot get that from AI, then of course we need to think about. I don't think AI can give you that aspect. AI can give you the information. I mean, that is the collected information all over the world. That's fine. But then beyond information, where is the knowledge? Beyond information, where is the wisdom? So these are the important things. So therefore, anyway, your observation that, you know, this right way to do business and earn money naturally has limits. In the sense, naturally impose limits. My point was that Buddha would not say, okay, don't go beyond this. If you can go without harming the society, without harming yourself, without harming the others, Buddha would say, go ahead. You know, that is the idea.
You just said just now that I'm relating to whatever you said about AI. Mm-hmm. And that's the coming culture. That's the culture that we live in right now. It's everywhere, especially. So I work with leaders, and the leaders and they work with individuals who are millennials or young adults. So this has disrupted everything. But now coming back to well-being, so there's a complete disruption happening in terms of mental health. So how does Buddhism now address that? How can Buddhism address that mental disconnect? Because it's that mental disconnect, because it's not just a disconnect in, okay, are we practicing? Because there's also the disconnect with community. a disconnect with religion, faith, practice, even parenting. So the parents are, not involved, or there's always a disconnect. So how can Buddhism address this by not being religious or spiritual?
By not being religious?
By not putting it out, okay, it's loving kindness, it's compassion. How do we bring that back? Of course, into the homes, yes, but in the corporate world, how do you bring this into the corporate world as a leader?
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, as your question seemed to suggest, there are challenges, particularly with the modern technology and the technology of communication and transport, and with these things. Buddhism has one very important thing when we talk about Buddhism is Buddhism has not been against modern developments. Of course, Buddhism is an ancient tradition, it is true. But if you take religions, particularly how the religious traditions have been responding to modernity, when we see that sometimes religious traditions in the world have been really not accepting or having reservations about modern technological developments. Now, in principle, we can say that Buddhism is not against technology or anything like that. However, technology provides us with certain challenges. Now, challenges, for example, if you take developments in communication and also transport, what we call globalization. Now, as a result of globalization, the whole world is very close to each other. So, there are positive aspects. Like, today, post-COVID world, we can have conferences, the online conferences. We don't need to go into places. Even my personal experience is, as a university teacher, doing a class, teaching a class online is not the very best thing. But, of course, you can have very good board meetings and things like that. That's my experience. However, the important thing is this. Ultimately, as far as Buddhism is concerned, I don't think Buddhism is threatened by any of these developments, okay? Because Buddhism is not against the technology. The important problem is how would these things affect the human being, his behavior, and his way of thinking. Now, I think that is where we need to think about it carefully, so that by using modern technology, if we ultimately try to replace the human factor, I think that is the problem. That will become a problem. Now, for example, you refer to the corporate world, the culture. However, when you say these big terms, corporate, global, and all these things, they are very, very big terms. But the Buddhist analysis would be ultimately behind so-called corporate world, behind so-called, the world problems and issues are ultimately human beings. Now, for example, if you take, now there is a deadly war going on in the Middle East these days. Okay, people are fighting, people are being killed. Now, you go on and analyzing it and see, do those people really want to fight? Actually, if you look at them, they will not want to fight. But then who decided to go on fighting? Who decided? Who made the decision? Ultimately, your decision is not something global. Your decision ultimately goes to the one or two human beings. Now, whether they are peaceful in their mind is also very important. So the point is, although these problems look like very big sounding corporate law, global law, universal law, whatever. Buddhist analysis would say that, of course, those structural aspects are there. We can't neglect them. I mean, if you take a global network of companies, there are a lot of things. But ultimately, the philosophy, the mentality comes from few human beings who made the policy. I think Buddhism addresses at that. So the other external things, actually, AI can make your information availability very fast. But my point was, AI cannot really replace human emotions, human maturity. Now it has to have to each individual person. But if I am only dealing with, if I am like a robot, dealing with only with information, okay. But beyond that, we have go home in the evening and say, I'm tired and get down, our humanity, human life, human nature. So that is where ultimately the modern technology doesn't provide for that. So I think the religion like Buddhism, or for that matter, any religion, or practices, meditation, metta, and a lot of things add to our personal well-being, then only, that is the contribution that Buddhism can make. Otherwise, sometimes, whether this information fast flow of information is a problem for Buddhism. No, doctrinally, I don't see it as a problem, And sometimes, similarly, there was a discussion whether heart transplant can be a problem for Buddhism. I don't see it. However, if our brains can be transplanted one day, so my brain is in your head and your brain is my head, then of course there will be a problem. Who am I and who are you? Then, we will have to tackle it in a different manner. But heart transplant doesn't give that problem. Whether it's my heart or your heart, it's still a blood pumping machine. But the brain with memories and everything will be a different story. But anyhow, we don't have very sharp answers and clear-cut answers to the question. But my overall response to you will be, actually, the religions should not, including Buddhism, should not really try to, fight against science or technology. But religion is there to guide technology and science for the sake of service of humanity. That's how I would look at it. Thank you.
So I think we've come to the end of this morning's session. We have to thank Professor Asanga for taking time off to be with us, to explain to us a little bit about well-being from a Buddhist perspective. I hope you had benefited from our discourse and our discussion, and you can take back some things that the professor had mentioned. So on behalf of the Buddhist Maha Vihara and all the monks and community members, and we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks and appreciation to Professor Asanga for being with us, and even though it's only for 2 sessions, hopefully we can get him here longer during August next year when the conference is on. And Professor, once again, thank you so much. Can we put our palms together and wish sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We'll present a small token of appreciation.
Thank you so much for inviting Leslie. Thank you for everybody for listening. Okay. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.